these parallel nuclear developments. Japan, with its conservative Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, despite the polls showing overwhelming opposition to anti-nuclear, to growth of nuclear power reliance, is announcing upping this. And the United States is also moving in this direction.
Well, I think these are both symptoms of the same phenomenon, which is the complacency about the nuclear industry and its dangers that was prevalent before Fukushima and is still still exists today. So we have Japan, the new government, which is hoping that the people will eventually forget about the crisis that they went through so that they can restart the 50 nuclear power plants that were shut down after the accident. And the United States, we have the government's all-of-the-above energy policy, which includes more government subsidies for nuclear power. And we're very concerned that if these efforts go forward without taking all the lessons of Fukushima into account, that we're setting up a potential disaster.
What are those lessons?
Well, the main lesson is you have to accept the fact that any nuclear power plant is going to be vulnerable to a large natural disaster and that there's no way to completely eliminate the dangers of nuclear power. There are steps you can take to reduce the risk, but we're afraid that here in the United States, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the industry are not going as far as they need to go to really reduce the risk to the American people.
What are the stories, Susan Stranahan, that this country is missing? You were the lead reporter on the coverage of 3 Mile Island. Young people weren't even born who are watching or listening to this show right now. They might not even know what 3 Mile Island is.
Well, I think the parallels from 3 Mile Island in '79 and Fukushima are that the industry, regulators, and the American public were not prepared for what happened. And what we point out in the book is that it's been 35 years since 3 Mile Island, and fundamental lessons remain unlearned, and fundamental mindsets exist that were prevalent in 1979 are prevalent today. And as Ed said, we haven't learned the lessons from Fukushima. We need to learn those and then move forward.
And explain what the lessons from 3 Mile Island and Fukushima are.
Well, I think it's what we point out in the book is that there is just a general assumption that nuclear power is safe, and we don't need to add on an extra layer for the unexpected. As we say in the book, they've set the safety bar at X, but have refused to ask, what if X plus 1 happens?
Ed Lyman, what most shocked you when you were doing research for this book?
Well, being in Washington for a long time, very little shocks me, but I could say that while the U.S. government was telling the American people there was nothing to fear from Fukushima and that U.S. plants aren't vulnerable to the same problems, internally there was a much different story. So we've learned from a lot of Freedom of Information Act documents that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the White House, were actually very concerned about the potential impact of radiation from Fukushima affecting not only Americans in Tokyo, which was more than 100 miles away from the plant, but also Americans on the West Coast. And they were furiously running calculations to try to figure out how bad it could get. But there was no sense of this in what they were telling the public.
But so Americans were telling the U.S. government was telling Americans in Japan to leave much quicker than the Japanese government was. We just came from Tokyo. We broadcast for 3 days from Japan. And we're going to play the interview I did with the former prime minister, the one in charge at the time, Naoto Kan. He said it was extremely difficult to get a straight answer from TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric Power Company that ran the plants, and he had to fly in. He figured the only place he could get a straight, non-political answer, he flew in the middle of the night to the plant to talk to the workers to figure out whether he had to evacuate 50 million people in Tokyo.
Yes, well, there was the general panic because the utility, nuclear power, was a huge part of its profile, and they wanted to do everything they could to stabilize the accident so they didn't have to tell the rest of the world that they were failing. And so there was a lack of transparency, which is persisting to this day and hampering the cleanup efforts.
The human stories that you followed, Susan.
I think that what we have always missed in the nuclear debate is the human side, the face of a disaster. And that's what I hope to portray by my contribution. Ed and our co-author Dave Lochbaum are nuclear safety experts. I'm a journalist, and I tended to see the opportunity to put a human face on a nuclear disaster. So we portray what happened to the people in Japan, the disruptions in their lives, the economic consequences, and a lot of the political backstory into how we got where we are today.
This leak that took place in the new facility, explain what that is and why you're concerned about it. Government officials say, don't be concerned.
Well, WIPP is the only operating geologic repository for nuclear waste in the U.S., and it's where the Department of Energy sends waste that's contaminated with isotopes of plutonium that have very long half-lives and are very toxic. So there's a lot of garbage from the legacy of making nuclear weapons that's contaminated with plutonium, and that is essentially put into 55-gallon waste drums and loaded into this salt mine. And the leak, no one really knows the origin, but they've detected plutonium and americium actually outside of the facility. And so they have to figure out exactly where it came from, and no one knows yet.
And now this has been touted as such a safe facility that New Mexico, this area, could become a depository for much more nuclear waste that might alarm many in New Mexico.
Right. The local boosters want to keep it going, and so they're searching the country for more waste to put in it. But this issue, depending on how it plays out, could put a monkey wrench in those plans.